Under the gray skies of Arlington, Virginia, on a late March afternoon in 2025, Ashley Johnson drove her sleek black sedan through the familiar streets she once thought she would never return to. The cold wind blew through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of damp grass and memories she had tried to bury for the past 10 years. At 36, Ashley was a seasoned CIA agent, her dark brown hair tied back neatly, and her deep blue eyes reflecting the sharpness of someone who had faced danger across the world, from the shadowy alleys of Baghdad to the dense jungles of Colombia. She wore a simple black leather jacket, concealing a Glock pistol at her hip and a tiny tracking device in her pocket, tools for a covert mission she had been assigned, investigating a corruption network within the local police force. One she suspected had spread across the Northeast. But Arlington was more than just another stop in Ashley's career. It was home. It was where she was born and raised, and also where she lost the people she loved most. 10 years ago, when she was still an ambitious college student, her family, her parents and younger brother, Daniel, became victims of a ruthless setup orchestrated by two corrupt police officers. They were accused of drug possession, something Ashley knew for certain had never existed in their home, and during a tragic pursuit. All three lost their lives when their car plunged off a bridge in a torrential downpour. The official investigation ruled it a tragic accident, but Ashley, with the instincts of someone who would later become a special agent, knew it was a carefully disguised murder. She left Arlington immediately after, vowing never to return until she could bring justice to her family. Now, with this new mission from the CIA, she was back, not just to do her job but to confront the ghosts of her past. As Ashley's car glided across the Key Bridge, the same place where she and Daniel had once played as children, the sudden flash of red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. A patrol car from the Arlington Police Department blared its sirens, signaling her to pull over. Ashley frowned, checking her speed. She hadn't exceeded the limit. Her headlights were working, and she was sure she hadn't violated any traffic laws. But as the two men stepped out of the patrol car, her heart nearly stopped. Jake Thompson and Mike Davis, two names she would never forget. Two faces burned into her most painful memories. Thompson, tall with blonde hair and a smug expression, was the one who had shouted accusations at her parents through a megaphone that night. Davis, shorter with sharp features and a crooked smirk, had laughed as he pulled Daniel out of the car in their final moments. Thompson slammed his fist against Ashley's car window, his voice cold and commanding. "Step out of the vehicle now. You're in violation of traffic laws." Ashley remained composed, rolling down the window, her sharp gaze locked onto his. "What violation?" Thompson smirked. "Broken tail light. Get out now. Don't make me repeat myself." She knew it was a lie. She had thoroughly checked her car before leaving CIA headquarters that morning. But she didn't argue. Instead, she opened the door and stepped out with the measured calm of a trained agent, her hand subtly brushing against the tracking device in her pocket, ready to activate it if necessary. Davis approached, his eyes scanning her with a mix of curiosity and malice. "You look familiar," he mused, his tone laced with mockery. "Who are you?" Ashley didn't answer, only stared at him, memories of that stormy night flooding back, the sound of her mother's screams, shattering glass, and Davis's laughter echoing in the dark. She knew they didn't recognize her. 10 years had transformed her from a naive college girl into a hardened agent. But she recognized them, and the fury inside her burned like an unextinguished flame. Thompson gestured to Davis. "Check the car." Davis swung open the back door, rummaging carelessly before suddenly holding up a small plastic bag filled with white powder, something Ashley knew wasn't hers. "Look at this, Jake." Davis laughed. "She's carrying possession with intent to distribute." No doubt about it. Ashley stood still, her eyes fixed on the bag. She understood immediately. This wasn't a random stop. It was a setup, and given her past, she had no doubt Thompson and Davis saw her as a threat. A ghost from a past they thought had been buried. "Hands behind your back," Thompson barked, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Ashley obeyed, but her mind raced. She knew they weren't just trying to arrest her, they wanted to destroy her. Just as they had destroyed her family. As the cold metal snapped around her wrists, she glanced at Davis, her voice calm, almost chilling. "Are you sure you want to play this game with me?" Davis sneered. "Shut up, you're finished." But Ashley wasn't afraid. She had faced far worse men in far worse places. She just needed time, and her plan was already in motion. As they shoved her into the patrol car, Ashley felt the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. Her parents, Daniel, the beloved faces she had lost to the corruption of the very men sitting in front of her. But this time, she was no longer the helpless young girl of the past. She was a CIA operative on a classified mission, with a team backing her up. Inside her jacket pocket, the tracking device remained silent, waiting for her to activate it. Thompson and Davis might think they had won, but Ashley knew this was only the first move in a game that would make them pay. The patrol car rolled toward the Arlington police station, and Ashley sat in the backseat, her gaze fixed outside the window as familiar streets blurred past. She murmured to herself, "You picked the wrong person to mess with." Her painful past wasn't a burden, it was fuel, a fire that would burn down the men who had destroyed her family. Her mission wasn't just to survive, it was to expose the truth. And she wouldn't stop until justice was served. The red and blue lights of the Arlington police cruiser flickered against the glass windows of passing buildings as it made its way downtown. Ashley Johnson sat in the backseat, her hands cuffed behind her, her expression cold but calculating, studying every move of the two officers in front of her. Jake Thompson gripped the steering wheel tightly, his large hands flexing as he occasionally glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Mike Davis sat in the passenger seat, absent-mindedly tossing the small plastic bag of white powder, the one he had conveniently found in her car, between his fingers. His smirk dripping with satisfaction. Under the gray skies of Arlington, Virginia, on a late March afternoon in 2025, Ashley Johnson drove her sleek black sedan through the familiar streets she once thought she would never return to. The cold wind blew through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of damp grass and memories she had tried to bury for the past 10 years. At 36, Ashley was a seasoned CIA agent, her dark brown hair tied back neat, top-quality stuff. Davis mocked, "She's not playing around, Jake. Possession with intent to distribute, that's an easy 10 years. At least." Ashley stayed silent, her breathing steady even as her pulse pounded in her chest. She knew that bag of drugs wasn't hers. Her black sedan had been thoroughly inspected at CIA headquarters before she left that morning. There was no way it had ended up there unless someone planted it. And as she caught the smug glances exchanged between Thompson and Davis, she had no doubt, this wasn't a random arrest. This was a setup, a personal attack. They might not have recognized her as Ashley Johnson, the girl who lost everything at their hands, but she knew exactly who they were. And the memories of that stormy night 10 years ago surged back like a raging flood. On that highway night, her parents and younger brother, Daniel, had been chased down by Thompson and Davis under the false accusation of drug possession, an accusation Ashley knew was fabricated. Just like tonight, she remembered the wail of police sirens, her mother's panicked screams over the phone when Ashley called to check in, and Davis's laughter captured in an audio recording she later obtained from a witness. Her family's car had plunged off Key Bridge in the rain, and the official report ruled it a tragic accident. But even as a college student back then, Ashley suspected the drugs had been planted, a signature move of these two corrupt cops. Now, as Davis held up the plastic bag and Thompson smirked, history was repeating itself, and the rage inside her burned hotter than ever. Thompson turned over his shoulder, his voice cold. "Got anything to say, or are you just gonna sit there until your lawyer shows up? Not that it'll help, you were caught red-handed." Ashley met his gaze through the rearview mirror, her voice so steady that Davis stopped playing with the evidence bag. "You two are good at setting people up, but are you sure you picked the right person this time?" Thompson's eyes flickered with hesitation for a split second before he masked it with a dry chuckle. "Cut the tough act. Who do you think you are? Trying to intimidate us? Ashley didn't answer. She didn't need them to recognize her, at least not yet. But she was certain now that this wasn't just a routine arrest. As a CIA operative, she had been assigned to investigate corruption within the Arlington police force. And Thompson and Davis showing up like this was no coincidence. Someone inside the system must have tipped them off about her presence. Or perhaps this was an unintentional act of vengeance from men who had no idea they were targeting the very person they had wronged a decade ago. Either way, she knew one thing for certain. They wanted to destroy her, just as they had destroyed her family. And this time, they thought they had already won. When the car pulled up in front of the Arlington police station, Davis yanked open the back door and dragged Ashley out with a rough jerk. "Let's go, tough girl," he sneered, shoving her toward the entrance. Ashley stumbled slightly but quickly regained her footing, her sharp eyes scanning the area, security cameras, other patrol cars, a few officers smoking near the side entrance. She could still feel the tracker nestled inside her jacket pocket, waiting for the right moment to be activated. Thompson strode ahead, holding up the plastic bag for the other officers to see. Another big bust. Boys. Possession with intent to distribute. Piece of cake. They led her into a small interrogation room, its gray walls stained with years of cigarette smoke and bad decisions. The air was thick with the stale scent of nicotine. Davis tossed the plastic bag onto the table and took a seat across from her, while Thompson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "What's your name?" Davis asked, his tone mocking. Ashley held his gaze, her deep blue eyes steady. "Ashley Johnson." She watched their reactions carefully. Thompson's brow furrowed, as if the name stirred something just out of reach in his memory. But Davis only laughed. "Good, Ashley Johnson. You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. You have the right to remain silent, but I suggest you cooperate. It'll make things easier." Ashley said nothing. She knew what they were waiting for: panic, desperation, an attempt to plead her case. But she gave them nothing. Instead, she sat up straight, her gaze moving between Davis and Thompson, committing every detail of their faces to memory. She recalled her father's words before he died: "Never bow to corruption." Ashley. And she didn't. Not 10 years ago. And not now. This was a setup, but she wasn't some helpless victim. She was a CIA operative. She had a team. She had a plan. More importantly, she had the truth, something they couldn't bury a second time. Thompson stepped forward, slamming a hand onto the table. "You think you're tough? We have evidence right here. You're looking at serious time." Ashley gave a slow, cold smile, the kind of smile that sent a chill down a man's spine. "Your evidence won't mean a thing once the truth comes out. You should be more worried about yourselves." Davis smirked, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. They shoved her into a holding cell, the metallic clang of the door locking behind her echoing through the room. But Ashley wasn't afraid. This trap wasn't her downfall. It was her opportunity, an opportunity to expose Thompson and Davis, not just for herself, but for her family, and for every victim they had ever silenced. As their footsteps faded into the distance, Ashley sat down on the cold metal bench in the holding cell, her fingers subtly brushing against the tracking device in her pocket. She didn't activate it, not yet. The time wasn't right, but she knew the game had begun. And this time, she was the one setting the trap. The Arlington police station's holding cell was dimly lit, the weak yellow glow from an old ceiling light casting shadows on the stained gray walls. Ashley Johnson sat with her hands cuffed behind her back, but there wasn't a hint of fear in her expression. The heavy steel door had slammed shut behind her, leaving only the low hum of an aging ventilation system and the distant murmur of officers talking in the hallway. She took a slow, steady breath, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room, an old security camera mounted in the corner, a small barred window, and scratches on the walls from previous detainees. This wasn't her first time being locked up. Her years as a CIA operative had put her in far worse situations. But this time, it was personal. Ashley's mind worked fast, analyzing every detail, Thompson and Davis had planted the drugs, she was sure of it. It was the same dirty tactic they had used a decade ago to destroy her family. Memories of that stormy night came flooding back. The wail of sirens over the phone as she called her mother. The sound of shattering glass as her family's car plunged off Key Bridge, and the chilling laughter of Davis captured in a recording she had uncovered later. Her parents, her little brother Daniel, they were gone because of the very men who had just locked her in this cell. But she wasn't the helpless college student she had been back then. She was a CIA agent investigating police corruption, and Thompson and Davis might be part of the very network she was after. She stood as footsteps echoed down the hallway once more. Ashley straightened her posture, her gaze fixed on the door. A young officer, not Thompson or Davis, appeared, pushing it open with a metallic creak. He was tall and lean, with tousled brown hair and pale blue eyes that flickered with tension. The name tag on his chest read, Brian Miller. He carried a plastic tray with a bottle of water and a document. Setting it down on the table in front of her. "Your name is Ashley Johnson, correct?" he asked, his voice calm but hesitant. Ashley nodded, studying him. There was no arrogance or malice like she had seen in Thompson and Davis, just a vague unease. Miller sat down across from her and unfolded the document. "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute. I need you to sign this to acknowledge the charges." Ashley met his eyes, her voice steady. "I'm not signing anything. That wasn't mine, and you'd know that if you really looked into this case." Miller frowned, his gaze flickering with uncertainty. He set the pen down, his voice lowering. "I'm not here to argue. I'm just doing my job." But Ashley noticed something. He wasn't comfortable. The way he avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in his hand as he held the pen, he was struggling with something. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but sharp. "Doesn't this arrest seem odd to you, Miller? Those two found that so-called evidence in my car way too fast, like they already knew exactly where it was." Miller tensed, his eyes darting toward the door as if afraid someone might be listening. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, but the lack of conviction in his tone betrayed him. Ashley allowed a small, knowing smile, the kind only an experienced agent would give when they sensed a crack in the opponent's armor. "You doubt them, don't you? I saw the way you looked at them when they brought me in. You don't believe this was a clean arrest." Miller pushed back from the table, his face flushing with tension. "I don't have the authority to question my superiors. You should keep your mouth shut if you want things to go easier for you." But he didn't leave. He stood there, gripping the plastic tray tightly, his eyes flickering between duty and conscience. Ashley knew he was different from the others, someone not entirely corrupted by the system. She decided not to push him further, at least not yet. But she had planted the seed of doubt, and that was enough. When Miller left, slamming the door behind him, Ashley leaned back against the wall, her hand quietly moving to her jacket pocket. With a precise motion, she used her fingertips to activate the tracking device, a short signal sent to her CIA team, marking her location and the emergency status. She knew they would receive it within minutes, and the plan would be set in motion. But she also knew she needed more evidence, and Miller might be the key. As she waited, she closed her eyes, allowing memories of her family to flood in like a source of strength. She saw Daniel smile as they played on Key Bridge, her mother's gentle voice reading to her, and her father's unwavering gaze as he taught her about integrity. "Justice will come," she whispered, her voice melting into the stillness of the holding cell. Thompson and Davis thought they had set a trap for her, but they had no idea she had been ready for a long time, ready to turn their own game against them. Out in the hallway, Brian Miller leaned against the wall, his hands trembling slightly as he recalled Ashley's calm demeanor. He had seen Thompson and Davis act suspiciously before, quick arrests, conveniently timed evidence, but he had always told himself it wasn't his concern. But this time, something felt off. Ashley didn't act like a panicked criminal. She acted like someone who knew she was being framed. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away, but the seed of doubt Ashley had planted had already begun to take root. Back inside the Arlington Police Department's holding cell, Ashley Johnson remained seated on the cold metal bench, her expression calm but her mind racing. The tracking device in her pocket had been activated, just a brief signal sent minutes ago. Enough to alert her CIA team to her location and the emergency. She knew they would receive it soon, and with the efficiency of the Special Operations Team she had worked with across dozens of missions worldwide, she trusted they would arrive in time. But she wasn't just waiting to be rescued. She wanted evidence. She wanted the truth about Thompson and Davis exposed, not just for the trap they had set today, but for what they had done to her family 10 years ago. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of her parents and Daniel fuel her resolve, waiting for the right moment to act. Outside in the hallway, Brian Miller walked slowly toward the records room, his grip tightening around the plastic tray he had just taken from Ashley's holding cell. Her words, "Didn't that arrest seem a little too convenient?" echoed in his mind, like a dagger pressing against his already uneasy conscience. At 25, Miller was one of the youngest officers at the Arlington Police Department. He had joined the force with hopes of bringing justice to his community. But after 2 years on the job, he had seen too much: unclear arrests, altered reports, and the way Thompson and Davis always seemed to walk away unscathed, their smug smiles never fading. He had told himself it wasn't his place to question his superiors. But something about Ashley, her composure, her sharp gaze, made it impossible to keep ignoring the truth. Miller pushed open the door to the records room, a cramped space filled with the scent of old paper and printer ink, its shelves packed with case files reaching up to the ceiling. He locked the door behind him, ensuring no one would walk in unexpectedly, then sat down in front of the aging computer in the corner. His fingers trembled slightly as he logged into the department's database, searching past arrests involving Thompson and Davis. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but his gut told him that Ashley's case wasn't the first time they had played dirty. After a few minutes of searching, he pulled up a series of reports, drug-related arrests, all with an unsettling pattern. The evidence had always been found at just the right moment. The suspects had no prior criminal records, and their statements were dismissed without further investigation. One case in particular made Miller stop cold. 3 years ago, a man named Robert Carter had been arrested for drug possession, with illegal substances conveniently discovered in his car's trunk. The report stated that Carter insisted he had been framed, but Thompson and Davis had quickly closed the case, citing "caught in the act" testimony. Carter later took his own life in prison, leaving behind a suicide note claiming his innocence. Miller felt his stomach twist. He remembered that case. He remembered Thompson joking about "some junkie loser" in the break room. He kept digging. In the past 3 years, he found at least 5 similar cases, all with the same troubling signs, evidence appearing 20 miles outside Arlington, CIA safe house. At a covert CIA command center, Ashley's team received the emergency beacon from her tracking device. A large screen lit up with the exact coordinates of the Arlington Police Department. Standing at the center of the room, Special Agent Sarah Carter, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, immediately issued orders: confirm Johnson's status. She wouldn't trigger that signal unless it was serious. One of the tech agents monitoring digital communications frowned. "We just intercepted an anonymous email to the FBI, reporting corruption at Arlington PD. It specifically mentions Thompson and Davis and ties into Johnson's case." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. This is our chance to expose what Johnson has been investigating all along. Get the FBI on the line. We're working together on this." Within moments, the CIA team coordinated with a nearby FBI tactical unit. As they reviewed Ashley's mission file, an undercover operation to uncover corruption within Arlington PD, it became clear that this arrest was more than a simple setup. It was a key piece in a much larger puzzle. Sarah glanced at the glowing coordinates on the screen, her voice a quiet promise: "Hold on, Ashley, we're coming." She knew Ashley wasn't just fighting for herself. She was confronting the dark past that had haunted her for years. And this time, she wasn't alone. Arlington Police Department, holding cell. Back in her cell, Ashley remained seated on the metal bench, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the air. She couldn't hear anything beyond the hum of the ventilation system, but she could feel the change. Her team had received the signal. The pieces were in motion. She thought about Thompson and Davis, so smug, so certain they had won. A cold, knowing smile curved her lips. "You have no idea what you've just started," she murmured, her eyes burning with the resolve of someone who would see justice served, no matter the cost. Night fell over the Arlington Police Department in Virginia, bringing with it a tense atmosphere that none of the officers seemed to notice, except for Ashley Johnson. She remained seated in the holding cell, her sharp gaze fixed on the small barred window, where dim streetlights cast a faint glow. The tracking device had sent its signal over an hour ago, and she knew her team was on the way. Meanwhile, at a covert CIA facility 20 miles away, Agent Sarah Carter and her team had coordinated with an FBI Special Operations Unit after receiving an anonymous email from Brian Miller. The coordinates from Ashley's tracker and the details in the email aligned perfectly. Painting a clear picture, Jake Thompson and Mike Davis hadn't just framed Ashley. They were at the center of a corruption network the CIA had been tracking for a long time. Outside the police station, the low rumble of engines cut through the quiet night. 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot, and a team of FBI agents in bulletproof vests stepped out, their gleaming badges reflecting the streetlights. Sarah Carter walked alongside them, her eyes locked on the building ahead. "We have arrest warrants for Thompson and Davis," she told FBI Special Agent Daniel Rivera. "The anonymous email and Johnson's distress signal give us enough to act. Make sure they don't get away." Rivera nodded and signaled to his team. "Move in, fast and clean." The front doors of the police station burst open with a loud bang as the FBI agents stormed in like a wave. "FBI, everyone stay where you are." Rivera's voice rang out as he held up his badge. The officers at the front desk froze, their hands instinctively moving away from their desks, eyes wide with shock as guns were pointed in their direction. In the break room, Thompson and Davis were sipping coffee and laughing about the tough girl in the holding cell when the commotion made them jump to their feet. "What the hell is this?" Davis growled, his hand reaching for the gun at his hip. But before he could draw it, 3 FBI agents tackled them in seconds, pinning them to the ground. "Jake Thompson, Mike Davis," Rivera said coldly as he snapped handcuffs onto their wrists. "You're under arrest for corruption, framing suspects, and abuse of power." Ashley heard the commotion from her cell, and a faint smile flickered across her lips. She knew this moment had arrived. The cell door swung open, and Sarah Carter stepped inside, her expression softening when she saw Ashley unharmed. "You all right, Johnson?" Sarah asked as she unlocked the handcuffs. Ashley rubbed her wrists, standing up with the composed demeanor of a seasoned agent. "I'm fine. Do we have evidence?" Sarah nodded. "We have recordings from your tracker." Every word they said in the patrol car and the interrogation room was captured. As the FBI and CIA teams withdrew, Ashley stood alone in front of the station, staring up at the night sky. She whispered, "Justice has been served, but at too high a cost." The truth had come to light, not just for her, but for all the victims of Thompson and Davis. Yet she knew her battle wasn't over. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter. The morning after the raid at the Arlington Police Department, the first rays of April sunlight fell upon the city, but the air remained heavy with the weight of the revelations. Jake Thompson and Mike Davis, once feared officers who had abused their power, were brought to trial just weeks later at the Arlington County Courthouse. With support from the secret recordings captured by Ashley Johnson and the falsified records uncovered by Brian Miller, FBI and CIA agents built an airtight case. In court, the prosecution laid out overwhelming evidence, fabricated arrests, bribes from local gangs in exchange for protection, and at least 3 cases, including Ashley's family, where their abuse of power had led to fatal consequences. Thompson sat in silence, his face pale and his eyes empty as he listened to the lengthy indictment. Davis, on the other hand, shouted in desperation, "We were just following orders. It wasn't all our idea." But his pleas did nothing to sway the jury. After 3 days of trial, the judge delivered the verdict. Thompson was sentenced to 25 years without parole for corruption, entrapment, and indirect involvement in wrongful deaths. Davis received 20 years for conspiracy and abuse of power. As they were led away, Thompson's eyes accidentally met Ashley's. She stood in the audience, her gaze cold yet devoid of satisfaction. Their sentences weren't just punishments for their crimes, they were warnings to others who had strayed down the same path. Justice, though delayed, had arrived. Brian Miller, the young officer who had sent the anonymous email to the FBI, became a figure of public admiration after the trial. He was praised as a symbol of integrity in a system riddled with corruption. The local press dubbed him Arlington's silent hero, and he was promoted to lead the newly established Internal Affairs Unit at the precinct. In an interview, Miller humbly stated, "I'm not a hero. I just couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." But to Ashley, he was the one who changed everything, not just saving her from Thompson and Davis's trap but also helping her reclaim justice for her family. The Arlington Police Department underwent a major overhaul following the scandal. The former police chief resigned under public pressure, replaced by new leadership committed to cleaning up the force. More than a dozen officers were either fired or placed under investigation for ties to the corruption ring Thompson and Davis were part of. Honest officers like Miller were promoted into key positions, offering a glimmer of hope that the precinct would no longer be a place where crimes were concealed. The Arlington community, once living under the vague fear of those in power, began to feel a shift, slow but undeniable. Ashley remained on the sidelines of it all, watching the changes with mixed emotions. After being released and having all charges dropped, she met Brian Miller once more outside the precinct, on the very day he took on his new role. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere yet subdued. "I don't know how far I would have made it without you." Miller offered a small smile. "You were the one who paved the way, Johnson. I just did the right thing." Ashley nodded, watching him walk into the station with the confidence of a man ready to fix what was broken. But as he disappeared inside, she turned back toward the building, a thought settling in her mind. She wasn't leaving Arlington just yet. Your mission with the CIA was over, the corruption network dismantled. The reports sent back to headquarters, but Arlington was no longer just another stop along the way. It was the place where she was born, where her family was taken from her, and now, where she had reclaimed justice for them. She decided to stay, taking an extended leave from the CIA to help rebuild the community. Ashley began working with local organizations, supporting victims of abuse of power, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what she and her family had gone through. "I won't let evil win again," she told Sarah Carter over the phone, her voice firm. Sarah chuckled softly. "I knew you wouldn't stop, Johnson, but don't forget to take care of yourself." Ashley smiled, but she knew the fight against injustice was never truly over. And she was ready. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, Ashley drove to Arlington National Cemetery, where her parents and Daniel rested. She walked through the rows of white headstones, carrying a bouquet of fresh chrysanthemums, her mother's favorite flower. When she reached their graves, she knelt, placing the flowers on Daniel's stone, then gently running her fingers over each headstone. The wind carried the scent of flowers and the solemn silence of the cemetery. She closed her eyes, letting memories of happier times wash over her, Daniel's laughter, her mother's storytelling, her father's words about integrity. Tears streamed down her face. But this time, they weren't from pain, they were from relief. "Justice has finally been served," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I hope you can rest now. I did this, not just for us, but for everyone else, too." She stood up, wiped her tears, and looked up at the deep blue sky above. The wounds in her heart would never fully heal, but they were no longer a burden. They were her drive to keep going. She turned away from the cemetery, her steps steady, ready for the next chapter of her life, not with the CIA, but with the community she now called home. Arlington had changed, not just because Thompson and Davis had been punished or because the police department had been reformed, but because people like Ashley and Miller had the courage to stand up. Justice wasn't just a victory, it was a promise. And Ashley knew she would keep that promise for the rest of her life. And that concludes our story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time for another journey in the pursuit of justice. When the commotion made them jump to their feet. "What the hell is this?" Davis growled, his hand reaching for the gun at his hip. But before he could draw it, 3 FBI agents tackled them in seconds, pinning them to the ground. "Jake Thompson, Mike Davis," Rivera said coldly as he snapped handcuffs onto their wrists. "You're under arrest for corruption, framing suspects, and abuse of power." Ashley heard the commotion from her cell, and a faint smile flickered across her lips. She knew this moment had arrived. The cell door swung open, and Sarah Carter stepped inside, her expression softening when she saw Ashley unharmed. "You all right, Johnson?" Sarah asked as she unlocked the handcuffs. Ashley rubbed her wrists, standing up with the composed demeanor of a seasoned agent. "I'm fine. Do we have evidence?" Sarah nodded. "We have recordings from your tracker. Every word they said in the patrol car and the interrogation room was captured." As the FBI and CIA teams withdrew, Ashley stood alone in front of the station, staring up at the night sky. She whispered, "Justice has been served, but at too high a cost." The truth had come to light, not just for her, but for all the victims of Thompson and Davis. Yet she knew her battle wasn't over. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter. The morning after the raid at the Arlington Police Department, the first rays of April sunlight fell upon the city, but the air remained heavy with